Ways, Chapter 1.1, Line, Shape, and Principle of Contrast. We're going to get into the elements and principles here. And in Chapter 0.0, the intro chapter, right at the end, it talks about formal analysis, and you're going to hear that repeated a few times. But formal analysis is basically using the elements and principles. Now, this book is a little different from some of the books I've used in terms of a couple things fall into principles as opposed to elements. But basically, the elements are color, form, line, mass, shape, space, texture, time and motion, which is, more current with kinetic works and also film and so on. Value, and then volume. 10 principles of art are balance, contrast, emphasis, focal point, pattern, proportion, rhythm, scale, unity, and variety. Now I'm going to show you really quickly before I get started on this. When you go to the learning tools, this still says spring. I'm working on summer revisions right now. When you come down here, there's a lot of things here to help you with this course. The Canvas guides, if you have a question about something, you can call them as well. Orientation for online learning, and then this is the free access for the ebook that's available. I don't think it's 21 days, I think it's 14 days now. Anyway, so there's some revisions I need to do here. But the point is, the elements and principles are right here. And I know it's a little far down, but this is really important and you're going to need to use this. So you can download it right here. I'm not going to do that right now. And then there's kind of a warning, and I'm going to repeat this as often as I can so you understand. If you just simply tell me that the artwork has line, shape, texture, form, you're not going to get a grade for that. You have to find where those things are in the work and discuss it in that way. So this is really nice, a listing of just what I just said for the elements, and down here, if you go down, the principles, okay? Principles are not as fleshed out, but it's still pretty good down here. And then some other terms down here, just so you have a sense. But these are not necessarily elements or principles, but they're words like iconography, okay? The identification, description, interpretation of subject matter in art. It's usually to do with something like a Christian cross or, a sort of a halo or something like that. That's an icon. So that's down there. So I'm going to back up. This is the principles of art. Now here's the elements here. But just scroll down. Everything is down there. Okay? So that is, again, I'll show you where it is. If you go home or here, and then you scroll down, and it's under, see, it likes to jump around, elements and principles and other art terms. Okay, so if you have any questions, you have some help there. Okay, so back to our chapter. We're focusing just in 1.1 and chapters 1.1 and all the way through to 1.10, which is a good chunk of the book, actually. Those are all focused on the elements and principles, and it really breaks it down and tries to help you understand it. When we get into chapter 2, then you get into media. Chapter 3 gets into some history, and chapter 4 gets into themes. But we're not really using chapter 4 too much. We'll refer to a few art pieces there. Okay, so the basic vocabulary of art is what the elements are. So you're kind of knowing what the art is made up of, if that makes sense. Principles of art are how they're organized. So that's sort of the grammar. Two-dimensional art, it has width but not depth. Height, width, no depth. So you want to be careful with some of these elements and principles. Some of them do not apply to three-dimensional work. Some are only for two-dimensional work. Some things are just for 3D. So you want to watch that. Lines are our most fundamental elements. You have to think, your first thing that you did is probably draw a stick figure or scribble or something like that as a very small child. And it's very innate for us to do that. This is these Nazca lines in Peru. This is a spider. So this is about 1,600 years old. They found this flying over, and this is such an interesting piece of art. It's so huge. It's 150 feet long. I'm assuming that's this dimension. I don't know that I want to say that this is a accurate description of line in the sense that it's not a painting. This is a huge land art piece where rocks were moved around. This is a sculpture that we're looking at, okay? So people would pile up these rocks and create these spiders. There are other images. The spider has to do with rain. So in a dry area in the desert in Peru. And Peru is interesting. It's a bit like California. It has a desert. It has a jungle. We don't quite have that, but a mountainous area. And then it has also an intense mountain area that's got a different ecosystem. So it's really got three things. So it's 150 feet long. It's created by scraping off the dark gravel, revealing white gypsum underneath. So it's actually a removal. So the stones are moved away, and then that's why you see the lines. They look like bumps, but they are actually scrapings, okay? So this is a line. It defines the outline line of the shape. So definition function of line, it's a connection between 2 points. I think we understand that. Defines the boundaries between planes. Now that's a little bit different, and we'll get into that. Defines shapes, directs the viewer's eye. That's really important in art history and in looking at artworks. There's a lot of arrows, but that's not what we mean exactly. Sometimes literally arrows occur, but diagonal lines will point your eye in certain directions that the artist wants you to see. It also defines shapes and it conveys a sense of movement and energy. Okay, so there's an interactive exercise I believe you can do on the website. We'll skip those. When we look at this particular piece, we're going to getting into 1 point perspective. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but 1 point perspective, all these lines converge into one location. If you can kind of see that, if I were to draw lines over this, you would see that. Now, he's describing this three-dimensional space, this church in Florence, the Santo Spirito, and he is really using a bare, essential amount of information with these lines. They're very clean and clear. Now, all this sort of other look to this piece, that really has to do with weathering and exposure, to water, something like that. But this is a really nice watercolor, just really light colored paper with pen and watercolor on here. But we see these delicate lines. There are lines describing every aspect of this church. When we look at the real image, we see exactly what he's describing. Now, realism, the sense of drawing things or getting all these shadows, that's an artistic choice. So he's not including any of this shading. That gets us into chiaroscuro, and that gets us into value. And that would be a different type of drawing. But you see these shadows here, and the shadows are not really there. A little bit. They're very subtle, okay? But he's trying to get you the sense of this three-dimensional space with an economy of line, which means not like overdoing it. Okay. Okay, so we're making the point about the lightness, darkness, and texture. Another work of art that we're going to look at, and this is from a graphic novel. And graphic novels are really interesting because they kind of get more into graphic design and they get more into some of the more literal uses of the elements and principles. But in here, you see all this action going on. And when I was talking to you about arrows, that's what I mean. Like this giant diagonal line is bringing our eyes both here, going that way and that way. And then there's these diagonal lines behind him going that way. He's got some texture there with his hair, but I won't get too into that. But also, this is jagged here. So we think of things, when we're talking about line as directing our viewpoint, it's got so much intensity and so much directional quality to this line. Diagonals are programmed into our brains to alert us to danger, to bring our attention and focus to what the artist wants us to see. So this is communicating direction and movement, like I said, and it's focusing our attention, and it adds the feeling of movement. And I'm going to skip ahead for a second just to show you this diagram. When we look at directional lines, which we're going to get into over here, there's a lot of things that we see. This diagonal line, this tells us something is in action. Does that make sense? So whenever we're seeing something like that, even if it's in a figure or another object, we're not seeing actual lines, we're seeing implied lines or figure moving in this way. Then we think of action and drama. What you're looking at here, vertical, horizontal, and diagonal, these are really basic in our primal brain, because when we see vertical, that we know a person perhaps is standing and not a threat. Horizontal, passiveness, calm, sleeping, right? And then diagonal, running. So if somebody in your primal world were running, either there's something happening where there's danger, you're either running toward an animal, or an animal might be running towards you or a person, but it connotes, or it brings up that idea in our minds, and artists use that a lot. Okay, I'm going to stop there for now.